Welcome to the custom build of Blender by Dylan Goo Studios. I'm Professor Goo, which is the name I've adopted about 10 seconds ago, because I'm going to teach you guys how to use this Blender build, which we've made ourselves for our own projects. Now, if you guys don't know, Dylan Goo Studios specializes in anime, 3D anime, which is NPR, or non-photorealistic rendering. In other words, we do like Toon shaders and stuff, right? You know, that's what people typically know NPR for. And that's true, but this build of Blender allows for that plus a bunch of other controls that sort of enable artists to actually make NPR feel as convincing as possible. And that's something that we feel very passionate about, and I know a lot of you guys also feel the same way. So let's get into the features that we've added, which I think you guys will find very useful for your projects as well. Now, before I get started, I want to let you guys know this is not a beginner tutorial. This is assuming that you have knowledge of Blender. And if you want to know how to learn more about Blender and get used to the software as a whole, I do recommend the Blender Fundamentals series on the Blender YouTube channel. You might recognize a familiar voice over there. But once you go more into Blender and you understand it, you can come back here. And here we are. Welcome back. So we are going to go into the shading workspace, and I've got a little setup here to show you guys what we have in store for you. So these are the four major nodes that we've added to the shader editor: shader info node, curvature node, screenspace info node, and the set depth node. All four of these are very important for NPR stuff, or non-photorealistic rendering. We use them in all of our productions. The shader info node is the sort of biggest one when it comes to Toon shading. It basically allows us to create the most optimized, most refined Toon shader with the most control. I'll show you how it works, but we're going to start off by recreating the default Toon shader, which is basically the Toon shader that you can make with default Blender nodes. It's built off of a simple diffuse shader, which is blue at the moment. It can be whatever color you want. I'm just going to turn it back to white. It's usually white. Send it through a shader to RGB node. Go to a color ramp for basically the line, the cell shaded line that you want to draw there. And then you can map it to whatever colors you want. And then, of course, an emission node for the final output. But yeah, that's a very simple setup, and it looks great. It's fine, but it has a couple of issues, and we'll go into that in a little bit. But I did just want to show that the current setup for our shader info node allows us to recreate the exact same output with just a couple of extra little layer blending things. So we have four different outputs. We can combine them all into, the same result. I'm actually going to real quick add just the self shadows in here, but that's not a big deal. So with that in mind, let's take a look at what's wrong with the diffuse shader. So the diffuse shader has a couple cool features, namely, like, for example, it has these cast shadows and stuff. That's great and all. It also allows you to, change the distance of the thing. But oh, look at that. Terminators. Oh, that's annoying. If you guys don't know what a terminator is, it's basically these little sharp, jagged peaks here at the edge of the normals. It's sort of it's a 3D calculation bug. Now, it's really hard to get rid of these terminators. So typically most NPR users will just sort of slide them and behind the shading line, and it's like, okay, it's fine. But, I'm not a big fan of those things, and you can't really get rid of it assuming you have cast shadows. Now, technically, you could turn off the cast shadows entirely, and then at that point, no terminators. Very, very clean. Okay, but now you don't have cast shadows. So it almost kind of forces users to choose between cast shadows and clean shading, and that's kind of annoying because some people want cast shadows for a lot of things. So let's talk about what we have in our shader info node. The shader info node uses diffuse shading, cast shadows, self shadows, and ambient lighting as four different outputs. The diffuse shading output, as you can see here, I'm using Node Wrangler, by the way, to use the viewer node, but we'll go through these four. So the diffuse shading output is specifically just the diffuse shader without any cast shadows at all. So no cast shadows allows us to get this really nice clean shading without having to worry about anything else. I'll just demonstrate that right here. You can actually turn off the cast shadows by simply turning down these values here. And now you have something that is quite clean, as you can see here. And there's no terminators. So you can actually do this, and it's completely clean, even though there's no cast shadows, which sucks, but We'll get into that in a little bit. Now, the next pass we have, as you might have guessed, is the cast shadows. Now, the cast shadows are completely isolated, so you don't have any shading in them either. But as you can see here, it's just the cast shadows pass alone. This separation is incredibly important because now we can add the cast shadows back. Sorry, let me just bring that back here. We can add the cast shadows back. And what we've actually done here is, if you notice, there is no Terminator line. Look how clean that is. Look how clean that is. No Terminator jagged spikes or anything like that. It looks beautiful. Now, the reason for that is actually because we've separated out the self shadows, because the self shadows are actually what are causing the Terminator. So if we actually take a look at this next pass, you can see that jagged edge. Now, this jagged edge is actually pushed back a little bit from where it was before. So we have a bit more leeway, but technically speaking, these self shadows are acting very similarly to the Terminator shadows that we saw in the diffuse, as you can see here. Just look at that. Very, very similar. So what are these self shadows doing? Well, basically self shadows are shadows that are cast onto an object by itself. Now, a normal cast shadow pass here is cast shadows that are cast by an object other than itself. So in this case, it's like this other object here is this other sphere. But like for the self shadows, it's specifically, well, what shadows are being cast, what light is being blocked by its own body, essentially. So those shadows are great, but they're not always desirable because of the Terminators, but also a couple other situations, which we'll get into. But this is a really handy feature because now we can turn off the cast shadows entirely, but keep we can turn off the self shadows, but keep the cast shadows on. So now we have a really, really clean option to keep cast shadows and have clean shading, which is beautiful. It's beautiful. This is an incredible game changer for NPR, in my opinion, and we use this for a lot of our projects. Now, we also have the ability to turn on self shadows by itself. I mean, if you want to, it's up to you. It's just an option. But typically, the real reason for this is to remove self shadows from the cast shadow pass. Now, we also have the ambient lighting pass, which is actually just essentially the world shader cast onto the diffuse shader. This is something that's kind of a problem with this normal diffuse shader as well. Let me bring this Terminator back into the shadows. There we go. Hide. But let me show you what happens when I turn the world shader up. As you can see, that threshold is actually being moved. And the reason for that is because the diffuse shader itself is actually getting brighter. You can kind of see what it looks like here. The world shader is actually casting light onto the diffuse shader, and you can't separate that from the diffuse shader. It's really annoying. So like you, by nature, will be beholden to the values of the world, which is bad for anybody who wants to add, like, I don't know, a sky map, or even an environment where you have some HDR lighting that you want cast onto the environment. It's annoying because that will cast onto the characters or cast onto other Toon shaders as well, and it'll affect your threshold for the Toon shader clipping and stuff like that, which you want, the clamping, sorry. And so if you wanted to separate that, which you can't, but if you wanted to, you would use this Blender build where we have the shader info node. Yeah. All right. Thumbs up. So this is actually an incredibly powerful tool because if you take a look at this and compare, if I turn on the ambient lighting, it has the same effect, except without the Terminators, which is nice. But if I turn it off, behold, no effect at all. In fact, one little thing, if you're curious, is, colors also change the values of the world. Look at this. So this is like how the default behavior would work. You turn that off, you can change the color of the world without worrying about the Toon shaders either. Beautiful, isn't it? That is an incredibly powerful tool as well. So as you guys can see, the actual shader info node passes have incredible use cases, and the fact that they're separate allows you to merge them together as you see fit. So another thing that you guys want to know about using it, now that I've gone over the features, let me just give you a couple of disclaimers. Now, if you want to use the shader info node, one thing you might notice in the beginning is, let me just turn this off. There we go. Oh no, yes. One thing you might notice in the beginning is that the cast shadow pass and the self shadow pass, right now I'm switching between the two, they look identical. And that's the default behavior. The reason for this is because self shadows are actually, they take a little bit of extra memory to process. So we actually turn them off by default. So you just have to check this check self-shadowing checkbox before it actually separates the self-shadows. And it's just an opt-in feature for each material. It's in the material tab and it's super easy to use, but just make sure you turn that on before you do anything else for that specific shader. But now, as you can see, we can separate them out. So it's great. Okay, so that's the shader info node. Hopefully that's everything you need to know, but we'll do a couple more tutorials on the shader info node and its applications in the future. There's a lot of applications for self shadow, for example, which involves like characters' noses and stuff, casting shadow on their face. This allows you to get rid of that entirely, which is awesome. But yeah, we'll talk about that more in other tutorials. Let's go to the next node, which is the curvature node. Now, the curvature node is something that I typically like to use for hard surfaces. This is a good example. I've actually got a weird sort of application of it for line art. But as you can see here, we have a nice little curvature node setup, which uses the curvature node with the curvature and also the scene and a couple of like noise things. I've got my own little node group for it here, but it's the same thing as if we used just the default node. So I'll go through the features here. This is what the curvature node output looks like. I'll turn off the overlays so you can see the actual outline here. But this is the combined output of both outputs, curvature and rim. Individually, they look like this. That's just the curvature stuff, which is basically the stuff that's like acute angles and stuff. And this is the rim, which is the silhouette of the object, which is pretty cool. Combined together looks like this. And when it's color dodged on top of an existing shader, you get something like this, which is kind of cool. The curvature node specifically is made to replicate some stuff that a lot of painters do, and a lot of things happen in real life in the same way, where you have this extra bevel because of the wear and tear of real life on every single hard surface corner. So the bevels actually get highlights a lot of the times, especially in anime, where you want to highlight those edges for geometry and also for some prettiness and etherealness. And because of that particular feature in anime, we wanted to replicate it in 3D. Now, typically, without this, this is what it looks like. This looks terrible. Even though we have a bit of a painterly sort of noise on it, it's like, it doesn't look like it's hand painted. It looks like it's 3D. It's a dead giveaway. It's way too under detailed and stuff like that. But you add a little bit of curvature and suddenly it's a little bit more believable. Now, this is still a bit much, which is why I have this version of it, which is essentially a refined version that has a bit more options here. But let's go over what these settings do. So I'm going to go back to the default sort of settings. Oh, that's a skinny node. The default settings, I believe, will look something like this, like 811 or something like that. The sample size, basically, is how many sort of samples you want in these little bands here. But I typically use 1 if I can, just because you don't want to be too expensive with this thing. And then the sample radius is sort of how far you want it to go from the middle. I usually use a value of 0.1. And then the thickness is actually referring specifically to the rim more so. So you can actually bring that up to 10 or whatever. I usually bring this up to like 5-ish, but you can go pretty much as high as you want. I think it stops at a certain point, but yeah, that's how those settings work. Very simple to explain, to be honest. But have fun with that. Once you have that, you can combine them together with an add node and then just multiply them onto whatever you want. So that is the curvature node. Pretty simple, to be honest. I do recommend using the curvature and scene rim separately if you have certain use cases. Like, for example, the rim light actually works great on certain characters. If you want to add a rim light to characters or props, which is awesome. One thing that you want to know is that if you add it to something that's subdivided or something like that, the curvature node will look like this. So that's not great, which is why we don't recommend the curvature node for like organic objects. The rim light node would work actually fantastically with organic objects. So in certain cases, the curvature output will not be useful, which is, yeah, we recommend it for hard surface stuff. So hopefully that works and is useful for your projects. Let's move on now to the next node, which is the set depth node. So the set depth node is a really cool feature that we just added in for fun almost. It kind of works similarly to the in front option. I'm gonna just show you guys real quick. The in front option in solid view that's sort of like a fun little thing that allows you to bring objects in front of everything else as like an X-ray thing. The only difference for us in the set depth thing is that we can actually basically drag a slider for how in front we want it to be. Look at that. Look at that. So this cube here is technically still, if I put it in solid view, still right here. The geometry doesn't move at all, but the shader itself can be dragged forward or backwards. So I can push this cube basically as far forward as I want, and where it's like in front of the cylinder, even though it's technically behind the cylinder. So one of the cool things about this is we use this a lot for eyebrows on characters' faces. This allows the eyebrows to shine through the hair, even if the hair is in front of the eyebrows. It's a very simple trick. We use it, technically you could composite it together, but we use it to preview the acting animation because those eyebrows will be visible in the end. But we can't see them as animators when we do play blasts and stuff. So now with the eyebrows basically set in front, we can actually preview the animation in a way that's more accurate to what things will look like in the end. So yeah, set depth is incredibly powerful, but it's so simple. Now, just a real quick demonstration of how it actually works. In order to get it to work, you do need to set it to alpha blend. Opaque would not work, as you can see, it's a little weird. Set it to alpha blend, and then also turn on show backface and backface culling. Otherwise, you might get some weird Z sorting issues like the bottom of this cube showing through and stuff. Just turn on backface culling. So that'll get you the results you want, and that'll work great. The way you plug it in is just like whatever shader you have, you just plug this in at the end of the node tree, and it works. This is a typical setup that you can do. It's just like camera data with Z depth and a little math node. Yeah, so that is how that works. Let's move on to the final node, which is Screenspace. The Screenspace node is something special. It is a hack. It is originally sort of based on the refraction node, which allows you to sort of see through things and like manipulate what's behind it. So late as usual, our main developer actually took the distilled form of the refraction node and gave us the Screenspace info node, which gives us these two outputs here, scene color and scene depth. This is really cool because what you can essentially do is do compositing in real time to whatever's behind it. So you can actually change the color of things. It's really cool. So just to demonstrate how this works, the view position here, by default, if you just do the camera data, it is just the normal, whatever's behind it, which is pretty cool. But you can also add a vector node here, which manipulates what the camera is supposed to be, essentially. So now you can have like this weird like refraction thing where I've sort of zoomed in a little bit and offset the camera for whatever's behind it as if it's looking from a different direction. So that's a really cool feature of the scene color. The scene color here is specifically just like the color itself of what's behind it. And then we also have the depth pass. Now the depth pass will look white most likely for you. And that's specifically because it's greater than 1. So it's being clamped right now. So if you do a map range node, you can actually get something pretty good. Yeah, there we go. So the map range node allows you to basically see more clearly what's behind it. There we go. That's a little better. Have an extra object there. So you can actually map it to whatever range you want. This is in meters, by the way. And you can get the depth of the scene. Let me just zoom back out a little bit. There we go. Oh, look at that. Beautiful. So this will actually give you the scene's depth for whatever's behind it, which allows you to comp it in if you want to. So I've actually done this thing where, first of all, with the scene color, I've actually just like changed the saturation, changed the hue a little bit. I can do whatever I want, really, which is crazy. It's crazy. And then you can actually multiply that, or add in this case, with the depth, which gives a nice little mist pass if I wanted to do a little mist pass here. So I could literally just take the depth pass and just add it on to whatever's behind it, and there you go. You have like a little fog portal. If you want to do a fog, you can do a fog portal now. So this is great for VFX. Late as usual has a lot of great examples of how it's being used. He is abusing this node to do really cool stuff. So he has some examples there, and even posts the nodes for that if you want to just learn from him what it can be used for. But yeah, we'll have some more tutorials on that later. This is an incredibly powerful node and great for VFX and other things potentially. Yeah, so those are the four nodes. Those are the four nodes that are useful for Toon shading in particular. We have a couple other things, for example, like the SDFs. We have the SDF section now, which we added in, which is, if you don't know, SDF stands for signed distance fields. It's essentially infinite resolution gradient maps, but that's kind of, jargon, technical jargon. You can use it for a lot of cool things. If you understand what SDFs do, you'll probably freak out about this because it's very useful. But if you don't, here, let me just show you a couple things that are useful that are more easy to understand, which is you have prefabricated procedural shapes. So this is super cool. You have circles. Let me just create a plane here so you can see this. Hide that real quick. So you can actually create stuff like stars and stuff very easily. Let me just do a quick little mapping thing so we get the right position. Here we go. There we go. So this BSDF, sorry, just SDF. This SDF is something called SDF primitives, this node here. And the primitives range to a lot of things, obviously, as you can see. We have rectangles. We have a heart shape that we can use. I mean, look at that. This is a fantastically powerful, just prefabricated procedural shape generator, which allows you essentially to create infinite resolution shapes. Now, you can just do a quick greater than to have like the actual shape be drawn and smooth. But yeah, look at that. This is infinite resolution. You don't have to worry about pixels or resolution or anything like that. Yeah, so you can change this to whatever you want. We have a bunch of them here. I believe one of them is the star. Yeah, the star is a fun one. For the star, just a fun fact, you're going to want to have at least 2 sides or 4 sides. There we go. I think you can do 3 sides. Yeah. So you can just sort of have like let's just do a 5-pointed star. You get enough inset for it. And it looks like normal again. Yeah, lots of cool features. But this is not necessarily related to NPR stuff. But I figured I'd mention it because it's pretty useful for some people. Okay, so let's talk about light groups. One of the most hotly anticipated features, I think, for the Blender build. And we'll show you guys how we implemented it and how you guys can use it. So this scene is pretty simple. We just have a simple sun lamp here and these objects. What we're going to do is we're going to make the objects only respond to certain lights, or the light only affect certain objects, or shaders in this specific sense. But if I go ahead and try this, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys, first of all, that in the light data tab, we have the light groups section. And this will allow you to control the light groups from here for the light specifically. And you can link the light groups to the materials. If we create a material real quick, you can see that there's a light group section under the materials tab as well that mimics the same layout. So what you want to do essentially is match these. That's basically how it works. The light groups UI is very simple, and the way it works is very simple because it's string based. So all you need to do is create a new light group with this plus icon, and you just have to name it something. I'll call it monkey, for example. And once you call it monkey, all you have to do is go to the shader that you want it to be linked to, choose this link button, and it'll see all the existing names, which is just monkey. And as soon as those two have the same name, it'll work. So just to show you how this works, I'm going to also turn off the default group because that's an important aspect of it. What this is the default group is basically a single light group that everything gets joined to automatically, which is mostly just there to mimic default Blender behavior. So we're going to remove that. And as you can see, now the entire environment no longer gets affected by this because it's been removed. The only light has been removed by from the default group, which everything else is a part of. And now the only thing that gets affected by the light is what happens to have that light group that it's a part of in its own light group sets. So right here, the monkey now is now affected by the light, but nothing else is. Likewise, if we remove this, it would be basically the same as everyone else. So that's how light groups work. But let's see what happens when we have 2 lights, right? So this is 2 lights in the same group. Let's remove that. And let's try to get this sphere, for example, to get a light from the other light, but not the first one. So this one doesn't have default light groups. It also doesn't have any light groups attached to it. This light is basically lost to time. Nothing gets affected by it at all. But we can just change this to sphere, or not change, but we'll create a light group, name it sphere. So now we have 2 different light groups, monkey and sphere, each assigned to each individual light. We can go here and we can now add sphere from the link list. We can turn this off too, but this is already there. This is already off of the default group, so that's fine. But now, as you can see, I can change the sphere lighting and the monkey lighting independently from each other. So that's a huge help, because if you ever want to have characters and environments shaded differently, you can do it now. You can also shade the face differently than the body. You can shade the hair differently from the eyes. All these things have extra control, which allow NPR to really shine, which is basically stuff that isn't physically accurate, but allows us to have more control over the output. But yeah, this is a really cool feature, but we have a couple more things to show. So I'm going to add this back to the default group here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the shaders from the default groups, which allows us to keep the shadows on for the ground plane. But now it only gets affected by these lights here. So that's pretty cool. Now for the shadows, let's talk about that real quick, because the shadows are pretty important as well. I'll create a new material here, and you can actually add these light groups back in, so the monkey and the sphere. I'm actually going to turn off the use default so I can show you how this is isolated. But because we have both of the lights in individual light groups within their light group sets for this material, it sort of acts the same way. But either way, I can actually press this icon here to turn off the shadows per light group. So I can ignore the shadows without turning off the shadows from the light itself. This is incredibly powerful because you can mix and match which things get shadows and which things don't. This is kind of enhanced by the shader info node, which does kind of similar stuff. So you can kind of mix and match those features as well to get the most control out of your scene. So that's incredibly powerful. And we also have the just the default group ignore shadows as well. So you can ignore the default shadows. But yeah, that's light groups. I think that's pretty much all you need to know, but I'll give you a quick rundown on how to remove light groups, just to say that you can unlink light groups here with the unlink light group button. That will remove it, but it'll still be on the shader, for example. If you unlink it from everything, the light group disappears essentially, because it no longer has a record of that existence. So that's just something to know. I'll just undo that real quick. But the thing about that also that you need to know is if you do happen to have, the monkey or whatever linked into the light group, and you're like, I want to get rid of this, and you press the minus button instead of the unlink button, the minus button will delete it from the entire scene. So it'll delete it not just from here, but also from the monkey, as you can see. So the monkey doesn't have it either. And if you try to add it back in, it won't be there. So that's sort of like a shortcut to delete it from everything, which can be good and bad. It's a very useful shortcut to have, but you may not want to delete it from everything. So just be careful of that. In the meantime, though, the linking and unlinking will work just fine. And yeah, this refresh button is just there in case it doesn't work. You can resync it, you can update it, but we've never had to use this button. It's just there just in case. So hopefully you enjoy that feature. But yeah, that's light groups. And that concludes the Getting Started guide. I really hope you guys enjoy this Blender build. It's something that we've put a lot of work into. We've been developing it for the past like 2 years or so, if not more. And we've been using it in production. So it's production ready, which is exciting. So I hope you guys really enjoy it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on Discord. The Patreon gives you access to the precompiled download, as well as access to the Discord. And all the support really helps us continue to develop and maintain this build for you guys. But yeah, that's it for the Getting Started guide. I mean, we actually have so many more features that we want to add, so many things that we can apply these features to, which I'll go over in more tutorials in the future, because this only scratches the surface of what's possible. But I hope you guys subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next animation. Thanks for supporting Dylan Goose Studios. Hope you guys enjoy the build.